A startup in Austin hires one engineer in Portugal. Great candidate, great interview. Offer goes out, everyone's happy. 6 months later, their lawyer calls with a question nobody wanted to hear. Do we have a taxable presence in Portugal? That's not a hypothetical. That's what happens when a company treats international hiring like it's just hiring, but further away. It isn't. The moment you put a full-time worker on the ground in another country, you've potentially triggered labor laws, local tax obligations, and in some cases something called permanent establishment, which basically means the country now considers your company to be operating there whether you meant to or not. Welcome back to Tech Stack Breakdown, where we pull back the curtain on the software architectures running the modern business world. Today we're digging into the cross-border payroll problem, why going global with your hiring is so much more legally loaded than it looks, and which platforms companies are actually using to hire abroad without stepping on a landmine. See, there's no such thing as international employment law. There are only national ones, and they don't agree with each other on almost anything. Let's start with classification. In the US, it's common to bring someone on as a 1099 contractor if you don't want the overhead of full employment. Try that same move in a lot of other countries, and you can get hit with what's called worker misclassification, where a government decides that a person was functioning as a full employee the whole time, and now you owe back taxes, back benefits, and some penalties retroactively. Then there's severance and termination law, which is where a lot of US companies get blindsided the hardest. In the States, at-will employment means you can generally let someone go without much process. In much of Europe and Latin America, terminating someone without following the exact legally mandated process, notice periods, required severance formulas, sometimes government sign-offs, can turn a routine layoff into a lawsuit. And then there's the money itself. Paying someone in their local currency on their local payday through their local banking system, while also correctly withholding for their country's specific tax and social contribution scheme. That's not a spreadsheet problem. That's a full compliance operation, repeated separately for every country you hire in. Do that manually across 10 countries, and you're not running a payroll process anymore. You're running 10 of them, each with their own rule book, and one mistake in any of them is a legal exposure, not just an accounting error. And it's not a small number of companies dealing with this. Remote hiring didn't stay a pandemic-era experiment. For a lot of tech companies, best candidate and candidate who happens to live in your country stop being the same search. Once you're regularly hiring the best person, regardless of geography, you're regularly creating new legal relationships in places your legal team has probably never had to think about before. So, a category of companies has built entire businesses around absorbing that complexity for you. Let's look at 4 of the biggest and how differently they actually approach it. Deel's pitch is breadth. It handles employer of record hiring, meaning Deel's own local legal entity technically employs the person on your behalf, alongside contractor payments, direct payroll for countries where you already have an entity, and even equipment and visa support, all under one login. The appeal is obvious. One platform for basically any hiring situation in well over 100 countries. The cost of that breadth is real though. Per employee EOR fees add up fast across a large distributed team. And some users report that with a platform this broad, support quality can vary depending on which country and which product line you're actually using. If you want maximum flexibility and you're hiring across a lot of different countries in different ways, some contractors, some full EOR employees, Deel's range is hard to match. Remote's angle is narrower and honestly more specific. They own their own legal entities in the countries they operate in, rather than leaning on third-party local partners the way some competitors do in certain markets. Their argument is that owning the entity means owning the liability directly, with fewer handoffs between you and the compliance risk. That focus shows up in pricing too. Remote has leaned into flat, predictable pricing rather than the more variable fee structures that you see elsewhere, which finance teams tend to like. The catch is the remote's country coverage, while large, isn't quite as expansive as Deel's. So check their entity list against your specific hiring roadmap before committing. If predictable compliance ownership matters more to you than having every single country covered, this is the more conservative pick. Oyster came at this from a slightly different angle. The founding pitch was about making distributed hiring accessible to smaller, fast-growing teams, not just large enterprises with big HR departments. The platform emphasizes fast onboarding, transparent cost breakdowns before you commit to a hire, and tools aimed at things like pay equity across regions. It's a strong fit if you're a scaling startup, making your first handful of international hires, and want something that doesn't feel like enterprise software. Where it tends to fall short is at real scale. Companies with hundreds of international employees across dozens of countries often find they outgrow it and need the deeper enterprise features that Deel or Remote offer at that size. Think of it as a tool for your first 50 global hires, not necessarily your 5,000. Rippling takes the least payroll-first approach of the four. Their core idea is a single unified system that handles HR, IT device management, and finance together, and global payroll, including EOR hiring in dozens of countries, is one module inside that larger platform rather than the entire product. That's a real advantage if you're a company that wants one system of record for employee data instead of 5 disconnected tools. New hire, laptop provisioning, payroll, and benefits all flowing through the same place. The flip side is that if global hiring is your main pain point specifically, you may be paying for a lot of HR and IT infrastructure you don't need just to get at the payroll piece. It's the strongest option for a company that wants everything unified, not necessarily the cheapest or simplest option if payroll compliance is your only problem. So which one do you actually reach for? It comes down to what you're optimizing for. If maximum range is the priority, a mix of contractors and full-time employees spread across dozens of countries, Deel covers the most ground. If compliance risk is what actually keeps you up at night, Remote's owned entity model puts fewer hands between you and the liability. Smaller teams making their first few international hires tend to be better served by Oyster, since it's built for that stage specifically rather than enterprise scale. And if the real goal is one unified system instead of 5 disconnected tools for HR, IT, and payroll, Rippling is designed around that idea from the ground up. International employment law isn't going to get simpler. That's just the reality of it. What a platform like this actually buys you is someone else absorbing the operational weight of staying compliant across 100 different jurisdictions, so nobody on your team has to become an overnight expert in Portuguese severance law just to bring on one great engineer. Real stacks, real decisions every week. This is Tech Stack Breakdown. Subscribe.